Thank you. It's good to be here. With all the history of being in D.C. water and coming from Washington, D.C., I want to make the first point of the afternoon is I live in Fayetteville, okay? Well, Washington is my home city, but 17 years ago, my wife and I moved to Fayetteville to work with Tyson. And both of us worked there for 8 and 9 years, respectively, where I had the privilege of meeting Jamie Burr. And we actually worked on things together. He's a person who educated me about karst geography. So what I want to do this afternoon, and I'm going to promise you that my presentation will be shorter than everyone else's, because what I would like to do is explain what Quantified Ventures does and hopefully spark your imagination about how the learnings we've gained in doing what we do might help you in, or us in our projects here in Northwest Arkansas. I would like to have an opportunity to have a conversation and a dialogue when I'm finished. So I'm inviting that. Let me tell you, first of all, what we're going to do. I'm going to talk about Quantified Ventures work. And we do work in 4 different areas. One is urban and coastal resilience. The second is agriculture. The third is health and human services. And forestry and land use is the 4th general practice area. And I'm going to try to tie together examples of some projects which we found to be successful in other places, hoping that you will find ways that it may be helpful to what you're doing here. Now, we came to Northwest Arkansas in 2003, and I left being the general counsel for the Water and Sewer Authority there, and I spent a lot of the time there negotiating 2 consent decrees for combined sewer overflows. And those consent decrees resulted in a 30-year, $2.6 billion capital improvement program. You know, it's a generational work to sort of clean up the 2 rivers in the nation's capital. And I want to give a shout out now to every single engineer in the room, because what you guys do is nothing short of amazing. You know, the design work that went into that infrastructure there, you know, we anticipate it's going to last for another 130 years with not a whole lot of mechanical intervention. So shout out to you guys for the math and the graphs and the charts and all that. Now, after I had worked for Tyson, I had the privilege of having the same job again, you know, but with the benefit of having worked for Tyson, having learned so much there, having defended non-point source litigation brought against the poultry industry, you know, in Oklahoma. And some of the things we dreamt about in 2004 were actually in the ground and functioning, and the rivers are now cleaner now because of that very, very focused and very hard work. The major thing that struck me as different when I came back was that because that program was so long and multi-generational and so expensive, green infrastructure became a really prescient alternative to the gray, because we were about 17 years into the program and we had another 12 to go. So the conversation was, gee, this costs an awful lot of money. And the rates were going up and up and up and up. In every public meeting about it, you could assure yourself that there'd be tremendous conversation about rational, less expensive alternatives. Green infrastructure was one of those alternatives. And we made I didn't make the argument, but the organization did, and they were successful in convincing the Environmental Protection Agency not to allow us to substitute for a portion of the plan green instead of gray, okay? Now, y'all who worked with EPA may understand that, and EPA was our regulating agency at the time, EPA never allows you to renegotiate a consent decree. But they did so on the prospect that green infrastructure was a viable solution. And they gave us the time to kind of figure that out. So it's with that background that I will now explain to you what QV does. Because the time has come now in our experience that it's a good conversation in an urban environment like DC, as well as out here in Northwest Arkansas. So our practice areas. Well, let me tell you what Quantified Ventures is. We are an outcomes-based capital firm that derives transformational health, social, and environmental impact. And that sounds like a mission statement. It's very close to one, but what it really means is we like doing new things that are hard for the first time. We have some pretty good partnerships with the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, as well as the National Forest Foundation. And we do consulting, project development, and as I said, problem solving, meaning if it's new, hasn't been done, it's hard, and as Scott was saying, if you don't know where the money's coming from to do it, please have a conversation with us. So our practice areas, first, urban and coastal resilience. And this is where we have the most fun. There's a table here that shows the evolution of green bond and environmental impact bonds. But I will say first, before I go there, that QV, and I did not work for them then, when I was general counsel at DC Water, created the first environmental impact bond in the country. And they did that because we had had the grace from EPA to try it. And we had the time to try to do it. So in 2016, the District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority issued a $25 million bond for 30 years, and it was a privately placed bond. We worked with the Harvard School of Business and private insurers who thought it was worth, investors who thought it was worth the risk to invest in the outcome. So what do? We forecast a metric for volume captured over a 5-year period. Depending upon the performance of the project at the end of that 5-year term, we would either demonstrate a low capture rate, a middle ground capture rate, or a high capture rate, and depending upon what the performance was, the investors would either give back money or we would pay them more. And as it turned out, the performance of the project in 5 years landed right in the middle zone. So the investors got what they were looking for, we knew what we had to pay, and we moved on. That was in 2016. That was extremely complicated. It was really hard to do. And we probably would not have been able to do it if the investors didn't care about the outcomes, or had we not gotten the grace from the federal regulators to try, okay? So in 2019, the city of Atlanta had some historic flooding problems in some historically underserved communities. And they tried the same thing, only they didn't have a 3-tier structure, they had a 2-tier structure. And their issuance was for $14 million over a 10-year period. Still hard to do, okay? And that was partially private, partially public. Then the city of Hampton, Virginia came along, and Hampton is a coastal community which really understands rising sea levels, and they understand flooding in their communities. And they came up upon a brilliant, in combination with QV, a brilliant solution. They issued a $12 million bond, 20-year term, all publicly financed, and they did something so simple. They said, we're going to capture and store this much stormwater, and we're going to do it over this period of time. Not only are we going to promise to do it, we're going to measure it, and then we're going to disclose what happened. And that's where the current environmental impact bond lives today. 3 simple things. We're going to predict an outcome, we're going to measure it, and we're going to report it. No more 3-tier sort of 5-year performance-based evaluation. Simple math. And that was in 2020. And this spring, when I was working with QB, the city of Buffalo issued a $54 million 30-year bond. And their metric simply was, we're going to do 200 acres of green infrastructure on public land in 7 years. That's the promise. Promise is we're going to measure, promise is we're going to report. And that's where the environmental impact bond is now. That's the evolution. And if you can see from 2016, not a lot of progress. But from 19 to 21, there's this evolution. And we're working on other bonds for other cities with very simple metrics. It could be water sent to recharge zone, okay? And we will report that result because transparency is the hallmark of an environmental impact bond. And it should be the transparency of most government operations, you know? I mean, when I started to practice law, the ink on the Clean Water Act was still wet, okay? And there was a great focus on point source solutions, you know? It's now since changed, and was it Andy and Brenda who said, this is how things are now. You know, we have to focus on the non-point source solutions. And we hired people, T. Thomas, who was a former state revolving fund director for the state of Vermont, just to be intellectual capital to help us find money to do things that cities and companies, because companies can get federal monies too to do things. So we're focused on moving this opportunity along. Now, we also, I think, are doing some pretty exciting work with agriculture. We set up a subsidiary called the the Reharvest Partners, LLC. What Reharvest Partners does is it partners with the Iowa Soybean Association. And we pay farmers to implement regenerative agricultural practices, and the farmers then convey whatever carbon or clean water credits result from those practices to us, which we in turn sell to Cargill and other corporates to help with their 3rd-tier sustainability objectives. And those are the objectives that corporates basically want to encourage their supply chain providers to deliver. So that's very exciting. And in Iowa, God bless them, they also created the opportunity for municipalities to buy the reductions in phosphorus and nitrogen as a consequence of those practices that are implemented. Last year, there was about 9,500 acres of land under contract in Iowa. That has expanded. We've expanded operations to Illinois, Ohio, and Missouri, and now we have 100,000 acres under management. Same process. You know, implement the practice, convey the carbon, we sell the carbon to the corporates who appreciate the 360 sustainability objectives. Now, health and human services is our 3rd area, and you might think that this really doesn't tie into the environmental pieces of work that we're doing, but it does in that our health and human services practice looks at social determinants of health. That is, you know, access to medical care, your zip code, your social and economic status, and we are trying to convince, and we have contracts with medical providers and insurers who see the benefit of positive medical outcomes based upon interventions. For example, there's a reference here in the slide to medical respite capacity. What that means is if someone is suffering from homelessness and they have a medical event, they recover better if they live in a structured environment for a period of time for their period of recovery, demonstrated. And the way that managed care providers and insurers work is they've got contracts with states. They get to keep the savings on their costs. So they see the benefit of collaborating with local 501c3 providers in that field. So we set up a $5 million Family-Focused Recovery Impact Fund. It's a 501c3, separate from Quantified Ventures, that basically is there to empower local service organizations who are doing this kind of work. Because generally, if you're a 501c3, you've got a limited staff, you're doing everything, and you're just resource constrained. So this fund is there to help the providers of those respite services and other services to scale up to handle the work from, say, a Humana or an Aetna if that intervention is implemented. What's interesting in the tie-in to green infrastructure is we're working with the city of Philadelphia to identify the outcomes associated with the green infrastructure projects in that city. Now, there's a lot of literature that speaks to green space and positive effects on health, but we're trying to suss out with Philadelphia what are the health impacts of green infrastructure on people. So we're working through that as well. Forestry and land use, this is really exciting. It doesn't have so much to do with green infrastructure, but it has a lot to do with the process that we employ in working with our partners. This is a list of the 9 national forests that we're doing work with. We have a partnership agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm not going to speak to all of these opportunities, but the idea is that the Forest Service spends a ton of money on fighting fires. That's what they do. And as a consequence, there's a ton of deferred maintenance and missed opportunity to stitch communities together. So we're trying to work with them in their national forests, that have ties to their adjacent communities to make life better for all involved. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. Bailey's Trail System in Ohio. On this slide, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6 different stops along the railroad. This slide has to do with a trail, but it is not so key to the trail because I think this process is replicable in whatever public-private partnership anyone would want to start. So don't read trail as trail, read trail as the thing. Well, whatever the thing is, okay? Stakeholder alignment is key. Scott talked earlier about governance and authorities being important. Public and private capital, because Scott did say there's never enough money to do what you need to do. Community infrastructure, and in building the infrastructure, you're giving people jobs, okay? And you're also working with sustainable operations and stewardship, which is ongoing. And the benefit is that the area is different and better for this work. So our role in that function is to help build local capacity, to help with strategy, help with the political decision-making, and to secure money, because happily, QV has relationships with all the usual suspects when it comes to philanthropic funding, and we have just a strong desire to fix difficult things, as I said earlier. And in connection with this project, we've got commitments for $9 million to advance the trail system, which will stitch together three communities with the resultant economic projected benefits. The Vellamont Trail and Huts project is an example of dreaming big. You see the partners at the end on the bottom of the screen. You got the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, the Trust for Public Lands, the Vermont Huts Association, and all these organizations are putting together a big dream of constructing 30 new huts on a 485-mile trail network from Vermont, in Vermont, that connects Massachusetts to Canada. Same playbook, or no, these are the results of that collaboration, or the anticipated results of the collaboration. Tourism. You have trails, you have huts, you have annual visitors generating income. We think we're going to employ 330 young people to build the huts. They'll make income as they do that. They'll remain employed for a bit of time. And economic development, there will be tax revenue to the jurisdictions. And of course, health. Everybody's healthier when they're outdoors more. And conservation, as well as stitching, and this is the main benefit of this effort. It stitches together 12 counties and 27 communities and 23 trail organizations. So there's a playbook there that, you know, should be the mission of the people in this room. I've been really impressed with the presenters before now, with their passion and their, you know, depth of knowledge. And the idea is to, you know, maintain that, but also build the alliances that are important to get things done and to believe that they can get done. So here's the playbook, and here are the barriers to the playbook. Nothing new here. Public funding is limited and it's competitive. And you know, there's 6,000 things every municipal officer and operator or administrator, DPW, DOT person, you know, has to do. And there's never enough money or enough time. You just have to deal with that. The other pre-development process associated with any project is long and it is expensive. We reference the NEPA here because it comes from the federal trails, but there are local requirements that take forever to satisfy, and they're expensive to do. So work, I think, can be done on working through different standards, apropos of what Brenda and Andy were talking about earlier. Rural communities have limited capacity. Well, that's the case pretty much everywhere. The question is, should that be a limitation on the collaboration needed to get something done? Construction costs are high, and that's where we have to find ways to find money to get things done. So our playbook with the trails, which I think is applicable to whatever project you may think of here, is we can borrow money based upon anticipated future project revenues. Do the huts generate money? You know, are there downstream beneficiaries who are better off because of the project done? That's leveraging your project outcomes. And this is the most important point here. There are many ways to do things. There are, you know, the usual laundry list of things that any local organization has, but, you know, we try to dare to think outside the box. You know, it doesn't have to be a bonding solution, doesn't have to be a contract. Most people do things that are easy, that they're comfortable with, and we try to encourage conversations about the untried and uncomfortable, and often we've had success with breaking through those barriers. So that's it for me. I would welcome any questions or any conversation.
Any questions? Any questions on green infrastructure bonds? I know some of you in the room have.
Oh, there's one thing I forgot to say about green bonds and environmental bonds and municipal bonds. All right, so quick definitional conversation. Municipal bond, everybody understands what that is. You know, it's a bond issuance. You invite people to compete, you know, to own your paper, and everybody's been doing that for 175 years. A green bond is a bond where the issuer says, please give us this pot of money, and we will apply some of it to green projects, okay? An environmental impact bond is where you say, give us money for this project, which we predict will have this result, we'll measure that result, and we will disclose that result to you. Think of a green bond as maybe an avocado with an organic sticker on it, okay? But a green bond is your avocado, your organic sticker, and a QSR code that says 5 gallons of water contributed to growing this avocado, and there were on average 9 hours of sunlight to make it happen. Okay, so the idea of the EIB is we're saying we are promising we're promising we're going to try. We're going to try really hard to get this done, and we will tell you what we did do, and we will disclose it when we're done. So that's that. Thank you.
Questions on that? Yeah, Stephen.
Yeah, you answered the question. I was going to ask the differentiator between that and EIB and municipal bond. Yeah. But as far as the rates, how do they compare an EIB versus just a traditional municipal bond? Well,
what we found is EIBs attract a tremendous number of people who want to participate. And that increased volume can sometimes have a depressive effect on the rate. That competition inures to the benefit of the issuer. The Buffalo EIB, for example, was oversubscribed by almost twofold, and because people were flocking to it, because it is a new product, it's a developing product, but there's certainty, and there's evolution from what DC Water tried to do 5 years ago, where you had to, be a rocket scientist or an engineer to figure out, what success looked like. But, simple metrics draw investors because they can explain, what they're buying. And it doesn't cost that much more. I mean, I would argue it doesn't cost anything more because, you work with the issuing team, to develop a technical memorandum that explains each of the elements, the prediction, the quantification, and the reporting regime. And that's a 6-week process. And as you know, bonds take forever to get from point A to point B. So it's kind of a false assertion that they cost more. Or at least that's been our experience.
Other questions for Henderson? And Jamie.
Jamie Burr.
First, appreciate, for my friends in the audience that are engineers, the compliment. I hope you're not expecting reciprocity as a lawyer on that comment. On the kind of the goal setting, the investors, what do they expect? Is there a threshold, a 90% of the goal or 100% of the goal or beat the goal? Has there been any situations where the goal wasn't met, and how have the investors reacted to that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any situations where the goal was not met, because if you can think about it, a local official is going to be really careful about what they promise, okay? And with the engineering help, the landscape architectural help, and all the other experts, including the CFO and the financial advisors, you got a pretty good appreciation of where you might end up, okay? In DC Water, as it turned out, I think it was, if we captured less than 18% of what we predicted, then we would pay back. The investors would forego an interest payment. Why? Because it was privately placed and they wanted to see it happen. However, if we overperformed, we would pay more, okay? So but the largest percentage in the middle, that middle round, like from 18% to 41%, was where we figured we would end up. And as it turned out, we ended up in that middle round because we did our homework. So I think if your metrics are clear enough and within your capability of performing, the chances of, not meeting that range are probably are probably smaller.
Anyone else? Yeah, Brenda.
Thank you for your presentation.
I mean, it didn't have to do with like Wheaties or Cheerios, but I thank you for the compliment, which was brilliant, everybody, okay? The Wheaties Cheerios thing grabbed me. It was like a TED Talk. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. So one comment I've heard on bonding in the past is the lack of being able to fund the needed maintenance activities that will allow a project to continue on. With environmental impact bonds, how does that work? Can those maintenance activities be predicted as part of the performance and included in with that?
We have not seen that, and I think if there was a real legitimate bond council in the area, they would probably say capital improvements are pretty much what you're limited to in a bond issuance. So, but that raises a great question, because once you put it in, and we had this, we're learning, or the people who are there now in DC are learning this, that green infrastructure is forever, okay? So, I mean, that's the point, right? So you're gonna have to plan going forward to how to take care of it. And I personally have had experience with fighting with the Department of Transportation, because we would put green infrastructure in the rights of way, and they would then come back and tear up the street and want us to pay for half of the improvement, okay? So there are those things that you have to work through, but no, bonds won't solve that. But solving those problems, though, is what government does. It can be ugly to watch happen, but we can solve for that. And there's maintenance associated with grade, too, right? Okay, so, yeah, it's the same conversation.
Maintenance, that's a question I've been asking myself a lot about as well, and I think it's something we have to tackle in this region particularly. I have a house in DC, and it has a DC-funded rain garden in the back, and I haven't seen it in 2.5 years, and I have no idea if it's being maintained whatsoever, and I don't think the city is coming out to actually inspect it.
Well, if we funded it, we should be maintaining it, or it should be. When I was there, we did.
Hopefully it is.
Okay, but yeah.
I haven't gotten any letters yet.
In D.C., and this might be inside baseball, but the Department of Department of Environmental Protection, I'll say, I forget the acronym now, is responsible for the work on public space. Okay, and I think regulates that on private space. We were more concerned with the combined sewer overflow maintenance, which cost millions of dollars, to do.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Really interesting talk and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all.